The microphone made a soft pop when my father tapped it. The chandeliers above us, the ones I had personally selected from a showroom in Milan, caught the light and threw it in every direction. The room smelled like fresh roses and expensive candles. 240 guests in their finest clothes. My sister in her dress, my mother dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. And then my father spoke. "We are so proud of our family tonight. Our daughter, Rania, our successful daughter, has married a wonderful man." He paused for effect. He always paused for effect. "And of course, we are grateful that our other daughter, Sarah, the one who is still finding her way, could be here tonight." He laughed softly. The room laughed with him. I was standing 12 feet away in a silver dress I had bought myself, holding a glass of wine I didn't want, and smiling because I had promised myself I would smile. What no one in that room knew, not my father, not my mother, not a single one of those 240 guests, was that every square foot of the ground beneath their feet belonged to me. The venue, the gardens, the terrace with the string lights, the bridal suite where my sister had gotten ready that morning, the kitchen where the catering staff were plating the third course, the parking lot where my parents' car sat next to the Rolls Royce that had arrived that morning. All of it. Mine. And they were about to find out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before we get to what happened at the end of that night, before we get to the conversation my father had with me at 11:47 p.m., standing alone by the fountain while the guests were still dancing, you need to understand what they did to me. Not just that night, but for years, systematically, quietly, with smiles on their faces. Because what my father said into that microphone was not an accident. It was a summary. A one-line summary of 28 years of a story they had been writing about me, a story I had never agreed to, never signed off on, but had been cast in the moment I was born second. And here's what they didn't know. I had stopped being that character 7 years ago. 7 years ago, I had quietly, without announcement, without celebration, without a single family dinner where anyone raised a glass, built something real, something that had grown year after year while my family sat around their dining table and discussed how concerned they were about my future. They didn't know because I hadn't told them. I had a reason for that, and the reason would become very clear before that night was over. By the time the last guest left, my father would not be laughing. My mother would call me 3 times before she reached her car, and my sister, my successful, celebrated, beloved Rania, would sit down next to me on the stone steps of the venue entrance and say 6 words that I will remember for the rest of my life. But we're not there yet. Let's go back to the beginning. The real beginning. I was born 22 months after Rania. In our family, that gap might as well have been a universe. Rania was, and I say this without bitterness, because it's simply true, extraordinary in every conventional way. She was beautiful in the way that made people stop speaking mid-sentence. She was academically gifted in the way that made teachers bring up her name years after she'd left their class. She was socially magnetic in the way that made every room she entered feel like it had been waiting for her specifically. I was none of those things in the obvious sense. I was quiet, I was observant. I was the kind of child who read instruction manuals for fun and spent Saturday mornings measuring things, rooms, distances, the height of walls for reasons I couldn't fully explain at the time. I was good at numbers. Very good. Not in the showy way, not the kind of good that won competitions or impressed anyone at dinner. Just quietly, privately, inexorably good at understanding how money worked and how spaces could be made to generate it. My parents did not see this. My parents saw a daughter who didn't sparkle the way Rania sparkled, and they made a decision. I don't think it was conscious, but it was consistent, to invest their attention in the return they could see rather than the one they couldn't. By the time I was 12, the architecture of our family was fixed. Rania got the better bedroom. Rania got the private tutors. Rania got the car at 17. Rania got the university fund. Rania got the conversations about the future, real conversations, with maps and plans and questions like, what do you want? And how can we help? I got the smaller room. I got hand-me-down textbooks. I got the bus. I got a loan that was presented to me as generosity. And I got questions like, have you thought about something more practical? And Sarah, you need to be realistic. I want to be precise here, because I know how family stories can blur into general grievance if you're not careful. I'm not describing a feeling, I'm describing facts. When Rania graduated university, my parents threw her a party. 60 people, catered, in our backyard, which they had temporarily redecorated. My father gave a speech. There were flowers. When I graduated with a first-class degree in property economics, which is relevant, I promised my mother made a nice dinner, just us. My father nodded at my results and said, "Good. Now what's the plan?" That was it. That was the party. That was the speech. What my father didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that by the time I graduated, I already had a plan. I had been executing it for 14 months, and it had nothing to do with anything they would have approved of or understood. For most of my 20s, I existed in my family's story as a kind of background character. Not a villain, they didn't dislike me, just furniture, present but unremarkable. Rania got a job at a consultancy firm. She moved into a beautiful apartment in the city. She began dating Tariq, who was exactly the kind of man my parents had been quietly hoping for. Well-educated, well-dressed, from a good family with a career trajectory that went in only one direction. I, according to the family narrative, was still sorting things out. This was the phrase they used. Sarah is still sorting things out. At family dinners, at gatherings, when relatives asked politely, cautiously what I was doing. She's working in property, we think. Something like that. You know Sarah, she doesn't always share. She's still finding her feet. Still finding my feet? I was 26 years old. I had already signed my third commercial lease agreement. I had already generated, in the previous fiscal year, more income than my father had earned in the previous 4 years combined. I owned outright, with no mortgage, 2 commercial properties in the city, a small warehouse I was converting, and a piece of land on the edge of the city that I had bought for an amount that would have seemed absurd to anyone who didn't understand what I knew about where the new transit line was being routed. But I drove a modest car. I wore ordinary clothes. I lived in a flat that was clean and functional but not impressive. I did not talk about my work at family dinners. I did not post on social media. I had no interest in performing success for an audience that had already decided what I was. So the narrative continued. Sarah is still sorting things out. Sarah doesn't have a plan. Sarah quietly, gently, with the best of intentions, is a disappointment. Here's what was actually happening during those years. I had identified, at 23, that the eastern edge of the city was undervalued. Not slightly dramatically. There was a combination of factors that I had spent months mapping. A proposed transit extension, a rezoning application that had been quietly approved, to 3 large employers who had filed intent to relocate their offices to that corridor within 5 years, and a demographic shift in the population that was moving in exactly the direction of that area. Nobody was talking about this publicly. The area was still considered unfashionable, the kind of area where property prices were low because people who could afford better went elsewhere. I bought there. First, a small commercial unit, a converted garage, I turned into a lettable workshop space. Then a larger ground floor unit I split into 3 retail spaces. Then a 2-story building I gutted entirely and converted to serviced offices. Each time I reinvested everything. I took nothing out for myself beyond what I needed to live modestly. I paid myself the equivalent of a junior office worker's salary for 3 years. And then the transit line was confirmed, and the employers announced their relocations, and the rezoning became public knowledge, and the area that had been unfashionable became the most sought-after commercial corridor in the eastern half of the city inside 18 months. My portfolio tripled in value in 2 years. I didn't tell anyone. Not my accountant, I had one by this point, a careful man named Hassan who understood implicitly that I valued discretion. Not my friends, most of whom still thought I worked in property management, which technically wasn't wrong. Not my parents, and especially not my parents. Because here's the thing I had understood by this point. If I told them, they would retroactively make it theirs. They would remember how they had always believed in me. They would remind me of support they had given that I had no memory of receiving. They would invite me to family dinners where I would sit next to Rania, and my father would say something well-meaning but structurally identical to every dismissive thing he had said for the previous decade, and I would watch them adjust their story of me without ever acknowledging that the old story had been wrong. I didn't want that. I wanted something else. I wasn't sure exactly what it was at the time. I just knew it involved waiting. Rania and Tariq announced their engagement at a family dinner in late autumn. I was there. I sat at the table and watched my parents transform into entirely different people in real time, luminous with happiness, animated in a way they hadn't been for months, ordering extra food, calling relatives, saying things like, "This is the moment we've been waiting for." It was a beautiful moment. I mean that sincerely. I don't want to sound bitter about this because I wasn't not about Rania's happiness. She was happy. Tariq was clearly a good man. This was a genuine thing. What happened next is where it gets complicated. 2 weeks after the engagement, my mother called me to talk about the wedding venue. They had found a place, she said, a recently opened events venue on the eastern edge of the city. Very beautiful, very new. Everyone was talking about it. The photos were stunning chandeliers, a terrace, gardens, a fountain. She'd been told the waiting list was already forming. We're thinking of reaching out, she said. Your father and I have set aside a budget. It's not unlimited. Why, but we want something special for Rania. I was quiet for a moment. What's the venue called? I asked. She told me. I wrote down the name, even though I didn't need to, because the venue she was describing, the one with the chandeliers and the terrace and the gardens and the fountain, was mine. I had bought the property 2 years earlier. It had been a derelict function hall sitting on a large plot of land that had been empty for 6 years, the kind of place that looks hopeless until you understand what the surrounding area is about to become. I had gutted it completely. I had spent 14 months and a significant portion of my reserves on the conversion. I had hired a design firm. I had sourced the chandeliers myself from a showroom in Milan. I had planted the gardens. I had installed the fountain. I had opened it 9 months before Rania's engagement, under a company name that bore no relation to my own name, a choice I had made for tax and operational reasons, but which had the additional effect of making it invisible to anyone who didn't look carefully. My mother didn't know it was mine. My father didn't know it was mine. Rania didn't know it was mine. No one in my family knew it was mine. And for a long moment, sitting on my sofa with the phone against my ear, I thought about whether to tell her. I thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. It does sound beautiful, I said. You should definitely reach out. The months leading up to the wedding were, in the family's story, a simple and happy chapter. Rania and my mother threw themselves into planning. There were tastings and fittings and long phone calls about table arrangements. My father was involved in the financial logistics. He was paying for most of it, which he wanted everyone to know, and which he brought up at every opportunity in the way that generous people sometimes do when the generosity is half gift and half performance. I was involved in the periphery. I was asked to be a bridesmaid, more out of obligation than genuine desire on anyone's part, I think, though I accepted without comment. I was consulted occasionally on minor decisions. I attended the planning meetings and sat at the table and offered opinions when asked and was quiet when I wasn't. At one point, my mother showed me the quote she had received from the venue. I looked at it. The pricing was correct. My manager had quoted them the standard rate, which was not inexpensive. My mother seemed slightly pained by the number. It's a lot, she said. It is, I agreed. But Rania deserves the best. She does. My mother looked at me with the expression she sometimes wore, the one that combined genuine affection with a low-level ambient concern that she couldn't quite conceal. You know, Sarah, I do hope things are going better for you. Financially, I mean. You always seem fine. But you never really tell us. I smiled. I'm fine, Mum. Focus on the wedding. She nodded. She went back to the quote. I looked at the document in her hands. My document from my venue, priced by my team, and I thought, not yet. There's something I should clarify because I want to be precise about my intentions. I was not planning a dramatic revelation. I'm not that kind of person. I don't like scenes. I don't like confrontation. What I wanted was not humiliation, not for my parents, not even for the way they had treated me. I'm not wired that way. What I wanted was simple. I wanted one moment, just one, where the truth was visible to everyone in the room simultaneously and could not be argued with, softened, or retroactively rewritten. Not revenge. Clarity. I had spent my entire life watching my family construct a story about me that was false, and watching it go unchallenged because I had never provided the evidence to challenge it. I had been, in a sense, complicit in the narrative not because I accepted it, but because I had chosen to work in silence rather than perform my progress for an audience that wasn't paying attention anyway. But this was a unique situation. 240 people, a room I owned, a night that would be remembered and photographed and discussed for decades. My parents at their most confident, their most public, their most certain of the story they had been telling. One night, one room, one moment. That was all I needed. And my father handed it to me himself. The day itself was genuinely beautiful. I want to say that clearly. My venue looked extraordinary. My team had worked for weeks on the setup. The gardens were lit with warm lights that turned everything golden. The chandeliers caught every movement and multiplied it. The fountain outside was surrounded by white flowers. The tables were arranged perfectly. The food from a catering company I had sourced and vetted myself through the venue's preferred supplier network was excellent. Rania looked breathtaking. She was radiant in the way that some people are on the best days of their lives, as if the happiness is coming from somewhere cellular rather than just from the surface. Tariq stood at the end of the aisle with an expression that I think most people in the room found very moving. I stood with the other bridesmaids and held my bouquet and watched my sister get married and felt something genuine warmth, real warmth for her. Whatever complicated history existed between us by proximity, whatever ways in which the structure of our family had placed us in implicit competition, she was my sister and she was happy, and that was a real and good thing. The ceremony was perfect. The reception began perfectly, and then my father picked up the microphone. I should describe the layout of the room so you can picture what happened. My main hall seats 240 for a seated dinner. The ceiling is 4 meters high. The chandeliers are suspended on adjustable rigging that I had specified to allow the light to be tuned for different events. The room has a raised platform at one end, not quite a stage, more of an elevated speaking area with a high-quality sound system. When you speak into the microphone there, the acoustic design means you're heard clearly by every person in the room without any sensation of projection or effort. My father was standing on that platform. He had been drinking, not excessively, but enough to be looser than usual. He was well-dressed, but he looked in that moment exactly like a proud father at his daughter's wedding, warm, emotional, generous with his happiness. He spoke about Tariq's family. He spoke about the journey. He made a joke that got a genuine laugh. He thanked the wonderful team at this beautiful venue. I noticed him gesture broadly at the room and said something about how no expense had been spared for our daughter. And then he said, "We are so proud of our family tonight. Our daughter, Rania, our successful daughter, has married a wonderful man." The pause. "And of course, we are grateful that our other daughter, Sarah, the one who is still finding her way, could be here tonight." The soft laugh. The room's soft laugh in response. I was standing near table 7. Yeah, which is toward the right side of the room, near the terrace doors. I had a glass of wine in my left hand. I was wearing a silver dress that I had bought from a designer I liked, whose work was not widely known. My hair was pinned up. I smiled. Not the smile of someone who is fine, the smile of someone who has been waiting. 3 people noticed. One was my cousin Dina, who was seated at table 6 and whose eyes found mine immediately after my father spoke. Her expression was something between sympathy and fury. She had always been perceptive. The second was Hassan, my accountant, who was there because, and this is relevant, his daughter was a colleague of Tariq's, and they had been invited through that connection. He caught my eye across the room and gave me a very small and careful nod that I think was the professional equivalent of, "I see what just happened, and I see what you are choosing not to say right now." The third was my venue manager, Layla, who was not a guest, but who happened to be standing near the service entrance, monitoring the evening's logistics. She had worked for me for 3 years. She knew exactly who I was, and exactly who my father was, and exactly what he had just said in the venue that belonged to his unsuccessful daughter. Her face remained completely professional, which I respected enormously. I did nothing. I finished my wine. I set the glass on a passing tray. I smiled at the people near me who were now looking at me with the particular discomfort of people who have witnessed something unkind and don't know whether to acknowledge it. I waited. Why? Because here's the thing about timing. It only works if you get it right. Too early, and the moment feels like an argument. Too late, and it feels like an afterthought. I had thought about this for a while. I knew what I was going to do. I knew when I was going to do it. The question was just whether I had the nerve to follow through. The dinner service ran without a single issue because my team was exceptional. Course after course arrived with precision. The bar was stocked the way I had specified well, with quality that the guests visibly appreciated. The playlist I had approved moved through its phases exactly as I had designed it, formal during dinner, warmer as the evening loosened, celebratory without being overwhelming. My parents moved through the room like 2 people at the peak of their happiness. My mother kept touching Rania's arm. My father shook hands with every male guest and kissed cheeks with every female one. They were, in that moment, exactly what they had always wanted to be. A successful family at a beautiful event, celebrating a successful daughter. I watched this and felt 2 things simultaneously. Genuine gladness for them in the human sense, and an extremely clear understanding that none of it was quite as they understood it to be. At around 9 o'clock, my father found me near the bar. "Sarah," he said warmly, as if the microphone moment had been a compliment rather than what it had been. "Are you having a good time?" "Wonderful," I said. "Good, good." He looked around the room with the particular satisfaction of a man surveying a domain. Beautiful venue, isn't it? Worth every penny, I think. Your mother was worried about the cost, but I said when it's for Rania, you don't cut corners. I looked at him. It really is beautiful. New place, apparently, only opened last year. People say the owner has an incredible eye. Very young, they told me. Self-made. He said self-made with the slight inflection that people use when they find something admirable but slightly unusual, like a creature they've heard of but never expected to see in person. That's interesting, I said. He took a sip of his drink. Anyway, I hope things are going well for you. I know you've been working hard. Whatever it is you're doing, I nodded. Thank you. He moved away toward another group of guests. I watched him go. Not yet. At 10:15, Dina found me on the terrace. Dina is 5 years older than me, so she grew up in the same dynamic we did. She's my mother's niece, and she watched my family from a close enough angle to understand its architecture without ever being inside it. She was the only person in our extended family who had, over the years, periodically texted me variations of, "I see what's happening, and I want you to know you're not imagining it." She came and stood beside me, and we looked at the garden together for a moment. "You own this place," she said. It wasn't a question. I turned and looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "The way you hold yourself in it, the way the staff look at you, the way that manager, the one in the gray blazer, keeps glancing over to check if you need anything." She paused. "And I might have Googled the company name on the booking form I accidentally saw in your mom's bag 2 months ago." I said nothing for a moment. "I own this place," I confirmed. Dina closed her eyes briefly. Then she opened them. "Sarah." "Don't. Your father just—" "I know what he said. Are you going to tell them tonight?" I looked at the garden. The lights in the trees were the exact warm temperature I had specified because I had spent 3 weeks going back and forth with the lighting designer about the precise warmth that would make the garden feel like something from another world in the evening. "Yes," I said. "When?" "When it's right." Dina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." And then, "I'm going to stay close." At 11 o'clock, something happened that I had not planned for, which is the way important things sometimes work. Hassan, my accountant, found himself in conversation with my father near the dessert table. I wasn't nearby, but Dina was, and she told me about it later in precise detail because she had been standing close enough to hear. My father, in the comfortable and expansive mood that a successful wedding evening generates, had been talking about the venue, complimenting it, saying something about how he wished he'd known about it earlier. They might have had more lead time, done certain things differently. Hassan, who is a careful man, a genuinely careful man who had worked for me for 6 years and who had never, in all that time, said anything to anyone that I hadn't authorized, made a decision in that moment that surprised me when I heard about it later. And he didn't reveal anything. He didn't say my name. He didn't make any statement of fact. He simply said, "It's an extraordinary property. The owner has an exceptional eye. You'd be surprised who some of these self-made property developers turn out to be." And then he excused himself and went to get a drink. My father apparently stood there for a moment with an expression that Dinah described as confused in a way that hadn't fully become understanding yet, but was on its way. I don't know what Hassan intended by that. I've thought about it since. I think he was a man who had watched me work in silence for 6 years and had found, in that moment, a sentence that was entirely true and entirely unimpeachable. And that planted something without telling anything. He is an excellent accountant. By 11:30, the evening was beginning its gentle wind-down. The dance floor was still active, but the edges of the room had thinned out. Guests were collecting coats, farewells were happening. My parents were doing the rounds, the final circuit of the room that parents do at their children's weddings, grateful and slightly sad, holding each other's hands. I went to find Layla. She was in the back corridor near the kitchen, reviewing the closed-down checklist with her assistant. "I'm going to need about 10 minutes with the venue documents," I said. "The originals, in the folder." She didn't ask why. She went to the office and came back with a slim folder. Inside was the title deed and the company registration document, the one with my name on it, clean and unambiguous. "Thank you," I said. "Do you need anything else tonight?" "No, it went perfectly, Layla. You and the team were exceptional." She nodded once professionally and went back to her checklist. I walked back toward the main hall with the folder under my arm and looked for my father. I found him by the fountain outside. He was alone for a moment. My mother had gone back inside to say goodbye to someone, and he was standing by the water with a glass of whiskey, looking at the garden lights with the expression of a man who feels that the world has, on this specific evening, been good to him. I walked over and stood beside him. Beautiful night, I said. He looked up. Sarah. Yes. Yes, it really has been. We stood in silence for a moment. The fountain made its soft sound. The lights in the trees were exactly as I had specified. Behind us, for through the tall glass doors, I could see the last of the guests moving through the golden room. Dad, I said, I want to show you something. He turned to look at me with the expression of mild, benign attention that he reserved for me, the expression that had always carried within it a faint undercurrent of patience, the way you are patient with something that you've accepted won't quite meet your expectations. I opened the folder. I held out the title deed. He looked at it. For a moment, nothing changed on his face. He was reading. I watched him read. I watched the moment when the words arranged themselves into meaning. He looked up at me. I met his eyes and said nothing. He looked back at the document. He looked at the company registration. My name, clear, dated 3 years prior. He looked up again. Sarah! I own the venue, Dad. I have for 3 years. The title is in my company's name. Layla, the woman who's been managing tonight, works for me. The chandeliers are mine. The garden is mine. The fountain is mine. I paused. The room where you gave your speech is mine. My father's face went through several things in rapid succession. I won't try to dramatize it, because what actually happened was quieter than drama. It was more like watching a structure that had been built on a particular understanding, slowly, silently, recalibrate in real time. He looked at the document again. He looked at the garden. He looked at the glass doors where the last guests were still visible inside. He said, "How?" And I told him. Not the full version that would have taken hours, and this wasn't the place, but the outline. 3 properties before this one. The transit line, the reinvestment, the years of working in silence, the portfolio that now, as of the previous quarter, was valued at something I told him precisely because I had learned from him that precision commands attention in a way that vagueness never does. When I said the number, he didn't speak for a long time. I stood there and let the silence sit. My mother came out of the glass doors at 11:52. She had her coat over her arm and her handbag on her shoulder, and she was wearing the expression she always wore at the end of a successful evening, slightly tired, deeply satisfied, the expression of a woman who has done something well. She saw us standing by the fountain. "There you are," she said. "Your father. I've been looking. Are you all right?" "You both look." She stopped. She looked at the folder in my hand. She looked at my father's face. "What's happened?" My father turned to her. There was a moment, a specific, irreversible moment where he looked at her and I could see him understanding that he was about to tell her something that would require her to rebuild a version of reality she had been living in for a long time. "Layla," he said slowly, gesturing toward where Layla had reappeared in the doorway to supervise the final cleanup. "The manager." "Yes," my mother said. "She works for Sarah." My mother looked at him. "This venue," my father said. "Sarah owns it." My mother turned to look at me. I held the folder out to her. She took it. She opened it. She read. I watched her read. When she looked up, her eyes were full of something I hadn't expected. Not just surprise. Something older and more complicated. Something that looked, at its edges, like grief. "How long?" she said. 3 years for this one. 7 years of building to get here. 7 years. 7 years. She looked at the folder again. She looked at the room behind her, the golden room, almost empty now. Her daughter's wedding, still visible in the scattered flowers and the half-cleared tables and the dimming chandeliers. "We didn't know," she said. "No," I said, "you didn't." And then Rania came out. She was still in her wedding dress. She'd taken off her veil. She had Tariq's jacket over her shoulders. She looked flushed and happy and slightly otherworldly. The way brides look in the last hour of their wedding when the formality has dissolved and what's left is just joy. She came out looking for our parents and stopped when she saw the 3 of us standing by the fountain in the particular arrangement of people who are in the middle of something. "What's happening?" she said. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at me. I said, "Congratulations, by the way. It was a perfect wedding." Rania looked at me, then at the folder in my mother's hands, then back at me. "Sarah," she said slowly, "is this your venue?" I looked at her. Rania is many things. Gifted, beautiful, socially exceptional. But she is also, and this is perhaps the version of her that the family dinner table never got to see, intelligent in a specific way that I've always respected. And the kind of intelligent that can read a room in 3 seconds and understand not just what is happening, but what it means. She understood. All of it. Instantly. She sat down on the stone steps of the venue entrance in her wedding dress, in Tariq's jacket, and looked at me, and she said, "You built all of this and you never told us." "No." "Why?" I thought about it for a moment. I owed her a real answer. Whatever my complicated feelings about the family dynamics, she deserved a real answer. "Because I needed to do it without the story," I said. "The one about what I was and wasn't. The one that had already been decided. If I'd told you, the story would have changed, but the deciding would still have happened. I needed to decide it myself." Rania was quiet for a long time. Then she said 6 words. And 6 words that I had not expected and that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She said, "I'm sorry, we let you down." Not my parents, not my father, who was standing 6 feet away. My sister, in her wedding dress, on the steps of the venue I had built, saying, "We let you down." I didn't cry. I'm not saying that with any kind of pride, I just didn't. I felt something open in my chest that had been closed for a long time, but I didn't cry. I sat down next to her on the steps. We sat there together for a while. The guests had gone by midnight. The catering team was clearing. Layla had the close down running smoothly. My mother called me 3 times between midnight and 12:20. The first time I let it ring. The second time I answered and she said, "Sarah, I want to," and then stopped. When I said, "It's okay, Mum, not tonight, get some sleep." The third time she just said my name and I said, I know, we'll talk." My father texted me at 12:47. It was a short text. It said, "I said something thoughtless tonight. I've said many thoughtless things over many years. I don't know where to begin. I hope you'll give me the chance." I read it. I put my phone face down. I walked through my empty venue, the chandeliers dimmed to their maintenance level, the tables bare, the garden dark except for the path lighting, and I felt the size of what I had built. Not in terms of money, not in terms of property value, in terms of time, in terms of the specific quality of silence that surrounds a person who has been working alone, without recognition, without a single raised glass, shimmer towards something that no one around them believed was happening. 7 years. It's a long time to be invisible. It's also a long time to be free. My parents called. We talked. Multiple conversations over the following weeks, long ones, difficult ones, the kind of conversations that families should have had years ago and didn't. My father, to his credit, did not try to minimize. He had the specific courage, and I want to acknowledge this because it's real and it matters to sit with what he had done and not explain it away. He said, "I made you smaller because I couldn't see you. I confused quiet with absent. I confused different with less." He said, "The worst thing about it is how long it went on." My mother cried. Twice. She also, and this is the thing I had not expected from her, asked to see the portfolio, and not in a performative way, with real interest. She sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours with the documents and asked careful questions, and at one point looked up and said, "You understood things that none of us understood. When did you learn this?" I told her, "When I was 12 and I started reading your property investment books that you kept on the bottom shelf." She stared at me. "You never told me," she said. "You never asked." That conversation changed something between us. Not everything. There's no conversation that repairs years in an afternoon. But something. Rania and I spoke on the phone the week after the wedding. She was on her honeymoon. She called from wherever they were, somewhere coastal and warm, and we spoke for an hour. We talked about things we had never talked about before. The dynamics. The ways in which the family structure had, in trying to benefit her, had done something to both of us, had placed her in the position of the one who had to succeed, which was its own kind of pressure, and had placed me in the position of the one who had to find another way entirely. We were both playing roles we didn't choose, she said. Yes, I said. I hate that it took this. So do I. There was a pause. Then she said, Are you going to come to Christmas this year? I said, Yes, but I'm bringing the wine and I get to choose it. She laughed. It was a real laugh. The kind we used to share before the family story about us had crystallized into something rigid and wrong. Let me tell you what the actual consequence was. Because I think people sometimes expect these stories to end in dramatic estrangement or public exposure or some kind of formal reckoning. That's not what happened. The real consequence was quieter and, I think, more permanent. My father has never again introduced me as the one who is still finding her way. Not at family gatherings, not to relatives, not in the company of others. He introduces me now with a specific care, a deliberateness that I notice every time. He says my name, and then he pauses, as if the pause itself is doing something, and then he says what I do, which is that I develop and manage commercial property. He says it correctly. He says it without qualification. It's a small thing. It's also enormous. My mother began asking my opinion on financial decisions, not performatively, genuinely. She called me 6 months after the wedding to talk through a property purchase she and my father were considering, and she listened to what I said and acted on it. And the decision turned out to be the right one. She has called me several times since. I have not made a performance of any of this. I'm not interested in being right loudly. I was never interested in that. I was interested in being seen accurately. There's a difference. The venue is doing extremely well. We were booked 14 months in advance within 6 months of opening. We've hosted 47 weddings to date, along with corporate events, private celebrations, and 3 charity galas that I'm particularly proud of. The eastern corridor of the city is now, as I expected it would be, one of the most desirable areas in the metropolitan area. 3 of my commercial properties there have been approached for acquisition at numbers I'm choosing not to accept because I believe the value will continue to rise. My portfolio has grown to a size I won't state here because the number isn't the point. The point is that it exists. It exists because of 7 years of quiet, consistent, unwitnessed work in the direction of something I understood and believed in before anyone around me did. That's all it was in the end. Not genius, not luck. Attention, patience, and the specific freedom that comes from having nothing to prove to the people who've already decided what you are. The speech my father gave at my sister's wedding took 47 seconds. It took me 7 years to build the room he gave it in. I think about that sometimes, not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with the particular clarity that comes from understanding exactly how long things take and exactly what they cost. He laughed, and the room laughed with him, and then they went home, and the room stayed mine.